Okay, there's a connection. All right, let's plug in. Here's our presentation. And we're waiting for everyone to come in. Let's give half a minute to see you come in. Cool. We're waiting for the obit. And we're about to begin our lesson for today. Well. Yes, I think we can start the start time already, so good afternoon, everyone. First of all, congratulations on the Day of Knowledge, the holiday of all who have school children. Well, and in general, everything is simple. It's a pleasure to welcome you to the Post-Profile Development course, and we're finally in session 4, where we're looking at all sorts of ready-made stuff, something you can use already knowing how to develop it yourself. And I'll tell you how to use it. So we will look at ready-made competency libraries and ready-made job descriptions, both in Russian and English from different providers. So this is the penultimate class. And we will talk first about the existing competency library, then about ready-made job description bases and how to use all this good stuff for your company, how not to make this just a replacement for all the work we've been discussing. I hope that at this point you already realize how important it is to design everything based on your company and not just taking from somewhere off the shelf. So we'll start with the existing competency libraries. There really are a lot of them. They're really cool. You're going to have a lot of additional material in your personal account today. And somewhere it's different libraries of competence, somewhere it's even an archive. I've grouped some stuff into an archive. So after class, be sure to download, look at, sort through for you to understand what you have. So the first thing I want to start with is the theme competency library. This is the coolest competence library I've ever come across. What's cool about it? Let me show you. So it's online, that's what it looks like. It has been translated into many languages. I mean, there's tons of it. Well, and of course there is in Russian. There's a competency set of about 60. Here they are listed alphabetically. In each competency, let's take, I don't know, there's something interesting there. Adaptability, for example, I think a lot of people use it. When we go inside adaptability, we see examples of behaviors, and they are divided on a level. What I said in the last class that when I described competencies, it's really cool to have levels. Here it is divided. That is, there is the general level, there is the name competence, description, behavioral indicators general level, operational level of the name. Such a little strange general operational tactical strategically. In fact, you could say it's level 1, 2, 3, and 4. So every next level it's higher. But that's not all. That is, besides the fact that here is a full description of competencies, here is the potential for development, says how it can be developed. There are interview questions here. It's super easy. Even, for example, if you are developing competencies on your own, or maybe even borrowing from another library, you can go here and look at the interview questions. That is, you don't have to make it up. It's good to make it up, but you can take a look. Maybe you haven't taken into account something. Maybe you'll find some interesting points for yourself. But that's not all. I could see that you were interested in grading for an interview and then developing that. There are developmental actions here. Not a learning action here, but what can you do in your job? That is, it is possible to make recommendations to employees. For example, you interview a candidate, you hire him, you see that this competency and your 5 competencies require the most development, and you immediately give feedback to people that, look, we're taking a good profile from you there. Of all the competencies that you have, we recommend that you develop this competency, and there's a set of recommendations right there. You're just giving it to me already. And the person is just thrilled that at the entrance, they are already given feedback and given hints on how to develop. I mean, it's awesome. And at the end of the probationary period, you can see, for example, whether he managed to tighten this competence. And there are coaching recommendations. So a set of questions, a set of points that you can discuss, like with a person, how they can further develop all of this. This is what it looks like. There are additional questions here. What is adaptability? What are the interview questions? But it's duplicated and the behavioral examples are duplicated as well. I don't know why it was repeated. Accordingly, so for all sorts of things. You can still download it all in PDF format. That's if you need to know, give someone to watch. Anyway, I think it's just super perfect. I mean, it's hard to even think of anything else that could be better. I'll show you the PDF format. Here is such PDF format still gives, adaptable trattata, and on all three, attention, flexibility on all competencies. There are 4 levels of indicators for each competency. For example, if you need to go to your supervisors and discuss what competencies a jammed position needs, you can print it out and walk around looking at it. This is such a library of competencies with a theme. Of course, there is, besides the library, this company here indicates all sorts of services. So you can look at, by the way, here's their website. They didn't link to the main site for some reason. I'll get it. You're the method. Let's try it so we don't have to leave. This is the company assessment that they're conducting. Well, they have various additional services in the talent area, talent software, talent development, 360-degree feedback. I'm not sure about other tools, how much they're available in Russian, or if they have representatives. I know that only the competency model is available. Okay, that's the first option. Next, there's the ADC competency model. Their model now has 35 competencies called PC Online. I wouldn't say you'll need to use this anywhere. It's more like if someone asks if you're familiar with the ADC competency model, whether you know about it or if some provider mentions it to you. Then you'll just know it exists, but in terms of practicality, I wouldn't say it gives us any advantage that would make us want to use it. Next, there's a model called the 20 facets. You might encounter this work. D is an organization that conducted a large study of executives in Russia and developed it. They called them facets. It's something like 20 competencies. Here at this link, you'll find the article Profile of a Successful Manager in Russia. What's interesting about this work is that it's a competency profile for executives based on a study of actual executives. Here's their model as they described it. It says 20 facets here. Essentially, these are 5 competencies because everything else is a breakdown. Managerial skills, decision-making skills, individual traits, interpersonal skills, and motivations. And this still overlaps significantly with Gallup's work on executive talent research. So this, let's say, might be useful for you to convince executives or the company to choose these 5 key characteristics for managers and focus on that. That is to say that this is the most important. It's another argument for why you focused specifically on these competencies. Then you can take more detailed aspects from other models, like stress tolerance, adaptability, and so on. Next, if you ever come across the company SCL, again, you might have some interaction or project with them. They have a model called the 8 factors of SSL. Their model is very extensive. It's divided into different areas and different levels. I wouldn't say their model is one you can just take and apply. You'd either need to get training from them or bring them in as contractors. These are the factors they identified. Each factor has sub-factors, and they've built many additional models based on this model. The first model is the UCF. It's a comprehensive framework that includes everything. Then they made versions for managers and for different types of leaders, for customer contact, for blue-collar jobs, and so on. So they built many different models from their framework. In my opinion, it's probably quite complex to use in a company. It's important to understand this in order to apply it. Here, for example, is a universal model. This is how it breaks down these 8 factors, which are further divided into sub-factors. Here they are on the right in Russian. This one for managers can be taken as an example of what can be required from managers with descriptions and competency areas. So for example, with the model we saw earlier, the DTEC, we can draw conclusions. For instance, we'll choose from these competencies for our managers, plus possibly from these competencies. Okay, this is separate for customer contact. They also selected these. But if you have such employees and need to develop competencies for those who interact with customers, you can take these 4 competencies. That is 4 areas, and each has a sub-area. This is for workers. Again, you might need this, so you'll be able to choose. Next, this is a detailed breakdown of each of these competencies. This one is for managers, also a set of competencies. This is for senior managers. That is top managers, line managers. These are top managers. Well, that's the model. Next, there's the Hudson model. Hudson's model is called 5+1. Why 5+1? Because 5 general competencies are chosen for companies and 1 for the specific position. Hudson also tried to summarize all existing competency models. They studied over 100 models from various companies and corporations, creating a huge database of about 3,000 competencies. Then they conducted an analysis, identified 6 competency clusters, and created the first 5+1 model, where each cluster contained 9 to 10 competencies, totaling 47 competencies. They proposed a competency hierarchy and developed definitions and behavioral indicators. Then they launched it into commercial testing and got a finished model. Accordingly, here's how the Hudson model works, which is very interesting. When developing a competency profile for a position, cards are given out. They actually produce such cards, and they ask participants who know the position, for example, a manager, maybe their deputy, some senior executive, someone from HR, or an HR business partner, and together several people choose 7 or 8 competencies from all the cards. They sort these cards and determine which competencies are most needed. This way, agreement is quickly reached and a competency profile is adopted. This model is not bad. I am going to show it to you now. It will be in your supplemental materials. The only thing is that it is not in the form of cards. If you want to use the card approach, you will need to print and produce them. This is the model, so now we are going to zoom in. Look, there are 5 tabs. These are the clusters. The first set of competencies is grouped under working with information. The second is problem solving. More precisely, it is business process management. Problem solving is one aspect. Then we have people management. After that comes the relationships cluster, and then the self-management cluster. There are competencies in each cluster. Let us take the first one as an example. Working with information. All competencies within the cluster are arranged from higher to lower level. For example, innovativeness is more relevant for top managers. You would not expect innovativeness from a janitor. Next comes a slightly lower order competency, communicating information. Analyzing information, then even lower, processing information, understanding information. This is the lowest level of competence. And each competency is divided into several areas. It is understanding instructions and procedures, understanding ambiguous information, and recognizing one's own capabilities. And within these are behavioral indicators. This model is good if you need to develop competencies individually for different positions. You understand that for top positions, you will use something from the higher level, and for lower level employees from the lower level, but you will be following the general direction of working with information. That is the approach. What else is good here? The behavioral indicators are very well laid out. Because writing behavioral indicators isn't necessarily difficult, but it requires a bit of skill. For example, when they only write knows and can do. And here all the behavioral indicators are constantly written as knows and can do. That's not quite correct. But when it's written, let's look at an example. Ability to objectively process. He uses a systematic approach, effectively processes, able to process, objectively interprets, can process, processes new information. There are verbs and they are different. Ability to understand, able to correctly assess, understands, can. Knows is also used, but not just knows and uses and can do. So that's the model we have. Okay, this is the Hudson model. The next one is the Spencer model. Spencer's model is very interesting because it comes with a book. This book is called Competence at Work. This is actually the most comprehensive book on competencies I've ever read. And this is the book I read around 2010 when I needed to build a competency model in my company, and I didn't know much about it. And it helped me understand the input, particularly describing behavioral event interviews, and it provides ready-made competencies. For example, a generalized manager competency model and a set of competencies. If you haven't read this book yet, I recommend it. And as you can see, it's also recommended by HCL. That's one of the leading companies in competency assessment. Next, there's the Lominger model. This model is also very interesting. It was developed by the Hay Group, now acquired by Korn Ferry. This model is very popular worldwide. If you ask which competency model is the most popular, most people would probably say the Lominger model. Why? Firstly, because the Hay Group is a very well-known consulting company with many products. Secondly, there's a book on the Lominger model called FYI for Your Improvement. Thirdly, this model consists of a large number of competencies, and they are well defined. We'll take a look now. So here's what's included: a book, cards, and a box for the cards. It will be presented to you like this. Yes, by the way, Spencer's competency book will also be in your supplementary materials. It's available in the public domain on the internet, so I've included it. Here you go. Now let's look at Lominger. We're going to open the Lominger file now. You'll also have Lominger presented in several files. I'll open the Excel file and tell you a bit about what you can find there. So here's the Lominger library. We're zooming in. There are several areas, and there's a description of each area and a list of competencies for each area. This is an example. These are the parameters. Here's a list of competencies by parameter, and then the competencies themselves. They are described like this. I'll show you the structure of one competency. So for example, let's take the 6th competency, what's included here. This file is not so much complicated as it has many tabs, lots of information, but it's very interesting. For instance, career ambition. Competency number 6. This competency has a described deficiency. A deficiency is when this competence is lacking. It's like negative behavioral indicators, and it describes what it means if it's lacking. For example, an employee doesn't know exactly what they want to achieve in their career. Next, substitutes are listed, which is very interesting. The idea here is that if a competency is lacking, it can be replaced or compensated by another competency. So substitutes for this competency are listed here. Then there's the norm describing when a person is proficient in this competency. And there's also an excess, meaning this company was one of the first to categorize people not just into those lacking competencies and those having competencies, but also identified excess competencies. It's true. There's even a book, I don't remember the exact title, called The Dark Side of Something. It describes the problems people face with overdeveloped competencies if they don't know how to manage them. For example, if a person has excessive career ambitions, they might make mistakes when choosing career options. They tend to only take on work that can be done without much effort. It seems to apply to careerists. They probably don't pay enough attention to their immediate responsibilities. They're so focused on their career that they're not interested in the here and now. Then there are compensators, some reasons why this happens, explanations and recommendations. And there are many of these recommendations for each competency. What do I like about the Lominger model? Look at how many recommendations there are. If you need to give someone advice on their competencies, even if you're using a different model or your own model, you can find the competencies here that match yours and simply take the recommendations from here and adapt them for your needs. But that's not all. There's also a set of ideas for development in the workplace. The set of advice and recommendations here is even larger than in TMA. Although TMA is my favorite library, they've really outdone themselves here. Let's look at another one, the 25th competency, employee recruitment. By the way, each company handles this differently. You probably won't see this kind of competency everywhere, but it's here. Let's look at another one, number 34, courage and directness, which is also interesting. Again, it's all in the same format: deficiency, norm, excess, compensators, reasons, explanations, and recommendations. And workplace development. This is such an interesting competency model. You have this and you'll have more. Now let me see, it's a Microsoft Word file. That's where it opened. Here's where all these competencies are described. They're labeled here as hyper-skilled. It's like a catalog of all the same competencies, just divided by people's skill levels. It's a simplified version. You can print out this document. For example, if you need to meet with a manager and discuss what competencies are needed for a position, you can use this printout. By the way, you see the 3 levels described here. They're just like in the file. Okay, all right. Zoom in like this. Next is a book, the book that accompanies the Lominger model. I checked, it's also available online for free, or you can buy it. The only thing is that it will also be in your additional materials. So everything that's publicly available, I've duplicated for you. I know you'll find it. Next, the next point is the Deloitte model. This model is also very interesting in its simplicity and versatility. I'll open it for you now. Okay, here it is. This is what it looks like. The model was developed by Deloitte. This is another leading consulting company in the USA. There are about 25 competencies here, the most popular ones. Each competency is described with a definition in 5 levels. It's very convenient because each competency is already broken down into levels, and there are behavioral indicators for each level. Additionally, negative behavioral indicators are also provided. It's also super simple. There are no questions for competencies, no recommendations for development. But if you choose this model, you can take some great development recommendations from Lominger and interview questions from TMA, finding the most similar ones. You can combine it like this. That could be an option. Okay, we've got that. Moving on. This is just a picture. There's also DDI's competency model. It seemed rather complicated to me. I'm just saying it exists. Maybe you'll work with DDI someday and encounter it. Well, this is probably a case where it's better to work directly with DDI. By the way, what's good about DDI is that they have very detailed development recommendations. We involved them for our assessment center in gaming. They gave us development recommendations for each competency. They're really very comprehensive. But DDI doesn't have this publicly available or somewhere where you could take and share it. So you need to collaborate with them. Next, TalentQ is a Russian company. They specialize in personnel assessment. They also have a competency model and a development guide. Here's a list of competencies they have, but their model isn't available in an open format. So we can't share it with you. You need to buy it from the company, but it doesn't cost a lot of money. Here's their website somewhere. Here's what it looks like. And what's also interesting, they have assessment tools. There's a 360-degree assessment. These are ready-made exercises for assessment centers, potential development assessments, and so on. So if, for example, you're considering working with a company on competencies, whether it's conducting an assessment center or a 360-degree assessment, I recommend you consider this as well. I would recommend you consider several companies. There's Hudson, the model we looked at. There's SHL, the model we also saw. There's DDI, the model you saw. All these company names are in this presentation. And there's TQ, because I think they'll have the most affordable price. This is what exists. Let's move on. There's also Savell Assessment and Professional Waves. You might encounter them if you deal with some American companies. I haven't come across any mentions of them in Russian. It's not very popular or well known here. That's about the most you'll run into out there. Hogan also has a competency model. Here, Hogan is known as a personality assessment tool. I haven't heard of anyone using Hogan's competency model. So just the personality questionnaire with feedback. I don't think it's worth using. Now for the job description database, those were competencies. You already know the difference between competencies and everything else. Besides competencies, there are of course supporting tools for describing the jobs themselves. The first interesting thing is not a model, but a library from LinkedIn. They have job description templates. It's in English, but if you're using Safari, you can click here to translate to Russian. In Google Chrome, the translate option is a bit to the right. Here's an example for Chief Operating Officer. And it gets translated into Russian. In what format? These are general things. How to write this person's job description, what they do. Then the job posting, goals, roles, daily and monthly responsibilities, skills, qualifications. The translation shifted the text a bit, but if you need it in English, everything is perfect in the original. That's the first option, but that's not all, of course. The second option is a great collection on a resource called Better Wiki, which has engineering and non-engineering positions. Here are the engineering positions from various companies. It's all laid out in these gray blocks with links. Here's one company, here's another. You see the link in the gray block. It's broken down by levels right away. Like this. Let's look at something interesting. Let's check out Basecamp Blend Buffer, like this. Let's look at one of the first ones. I don't know, this X. What's inside? Oh, this opens in GitHub. That's not as convenient. Let's see. There are different competencies, professional ones laid out at the delivery, domain expert levels, and so on. Again, if you need it in Russian, turn on auto-translate. Auto-translate works pretty well now. Domain expertise. You can copy directly from here. Well, it will be in Russian further down. On this Better Wiki site, there are options for both engineering positions, developers, and non-engineering positions. Here they are. There are various product roles and other positions. Here's Basecamp Blend Buffer again. You can find a lot of interesting things here too. Let's move on. We've studied those. Next are the salary market survey providers. If your company buys salary market surveys, the providers also have something like job descriptions. You'll have some examples from providers in a file, or rather a zip archive, but you'll need to download and unzip it. So inside, let me show you from AMT Consult, for example, what it looks like. It's about to open. There. No, not that. Here it is. Inside, they have descriptions. Close that. Job descriptions by group. For example, company management, board member, and the description follows. Who is a board member? Advisor to the company head. And there are such descriptions for a large number of positions, even broken down by levels in some cases. There's even human resources management here. Maybe not recruiters, but with recruitment selection, stylist. And hiring manager, look, level 3 supervisor, level 4, level 2 specialist, level 3. Well, here's a description, for example. So it's also a good collection of ready-made examples to draw from. AMT will probably be the only one in Russian, but you'll have some examples from Mercer Redford in English. If you're interacting with a provider, for example, even if you're not, I'll put it this way, if you're negotiating with a provider, companies have job catalogs with functional responsibilities for each industry they work with. For example, when I worked in television, we compiled a job catalog with functional responsibilities together with TV channels. And all the participants in the TV salary market survey received this catalog for comparison. You can, for example, even if you're not buying a survey yet, approach them and say you're interested and would like to see their job catalog. They'll give it to you. And here's another example. In Russian for the student. Next, there are some good online resources, particularly 2 sites with a good selection of job descriptions. But they're not called job descriptions. Essentially, it's a job profile. The job profile may not be in exactly this format. Here's one of the sites, for example. They have 1 page for each, probably about 5 positions per page, so around 500 job descriptions in total. What it looks like inside? Well, let's open one up. There's a general section, job duties, rights, and responsibilities, and you can download it. It's a pretty good resource, and I like the second resource too, and here it opened. There's quite a lot here. I mean, there are about 40 of these just for the letter A. Let's look at the letter M. There's one for personnel. Here's the personnel manager, right? And yeah, there's more to come. Interestingly, some of the job descriptions I opened, well, yes, here they were, the way they were written. Other job titles, subordinates, subordinate purpose, purpose of the position, objectives, functions, and requirements. Interestingly, for many positions, there is one for the HR manager, but I randomly selected one and it's not there. For example, I was once asked about a director of an online store, and I found a very good description. That's the kind of catalog you have too. So we've explored different ready-made tools, how to use them. It's important that your work doesn't just turn into assembling Lego without understanding the essence of your employee's work. That's why I put all this ready-made material almost at the end of the course. So I recommend using all these ready-made resources exclusively for reference purposes. That is, when you've already done everything, gathered all the information, and you need some additional information, questions, or recommendations. Find and describe the competencies themselves, preferably through behavioral example interviews. Let me remind you that besides getting good information, you'll also engage people this way. People will be much more receptive to your work if they remember and know that they participated in your interviews. They will feel it as something that was developed with their input. And when you say that we conducted 2 interviews or so and developed a job profile with competencies, it sounds much more convincing than if you come and say we developed competency profiles by taking ready-made ones. That sounds very slippery. So use them only to expand on the description. Maybe find some more elegant formulations of what you've described. To gather good behavioral examples, you can take models and development plans from there. Development plans and interview questions are very well written in the models. That's exactly how I recommend using it. Try to stick to our approach, write independently, and only then refer to sources. There, that's it. Today's homework will be to write out 5 competencies from any library, along with behavioral indicators for any position you've previously described. That is, just browse through the libraries, see which one suits you best for the specific position you're working with. Select all of that and put it in your file. In your homework, you can also write which specific library you got all this from. It will be simple. The only thing is that you'll have to review all the materials. Remember that you'll have many files embedded in the lessons. They need to be downloaded, some need to be unzipped. Plus, remember that there were links in this presentation. So look at the links and check the files. That's the homework. In the next session, we'll talk about how to effectively use all the work you now know how to do in all HR processes in the company. We'll look at everything from recruitment to assessment, performance management, and so on. If you have any questions about today's session, please write them down. If there are no questions, write down what was most valuable. Today we looked at ready-made libraries. We had minimal interaction because we were mostly just studying tools rather than theoretical parts. So we'll have an interactive session at the end in the form of your questions or just feedback on today's session. Well, friends, I'm waiting for your comments. Maybe you have some general questions about developing a competency profile that you forgot to ask in the chat earlier. If there are no questions or comments, then I wish you a productive week doing your homework. And if you have any questions, you can ask them in our Telegram chat at any time. In case they come up during your work, they're right now. Okay, yeah, I guess there's nothing. Well then, friends, have a wonderful day. Thank you for being online. And I'll see you in a week for our last class. Try to come in full attendance. Yes, thank you very much too. Goodbye, everyone.